Hello and a very warm welcome to yet another edition of World Panorama, the show that gives you a 360-degree view of the events that shape your world. I'm Sana Khan. Before we move ahead, here's a look at the top stories. US President Barack Obama presents the blueprint for a fairer America in his State of the Union address. Republicans slam Obama, say he's detached from reality. European Union imposes embargo on Iranian oil. President Ahmadinejad remains nonchalant, says embargo won't affect Iran in any way. Egyptians celebrate 1 year of the start of the Great Revolution, but concerns remain as protesters call for ouster of the military council. And late US President John F. Kennedy's last audio recordings released. The 1960 clips reveal his growing concerns about the Vietnam War and the upcoming elections. Those were the top stories this week. Our focus is US President Barack Obama's all-important State of the Union address this week. Now, why this address assumes massive significance is because the US President will not reach such a large audience again before his nomination by the Democratic Convention in September, and the 65-minute-long speech constituted the real kickoff of his campaign. To help us give the bigger picture on Obama's address, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Swaran Singh, Chairperson of the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament from the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Thanks so much, sir, for joining us. Before we get to him, let's take a look at this report. In the State of the Union address on the 24th of January, Barack Obama defiantly defended his record after 3 years in office and blamed banks and what he called an out-of-touch Congress for many of the country's woes. He proposed sweeping changes in the tax code and new remedies for the US housing crisis, setting economic fairness as the central campaign theme for his re-election bid. In fact, he mentioned taxes 34 times and jobs 32 times during his hour-long speech, emphasizing the two issues were at the heart of this year's presidential campaign. Here's more. The State of the Union address reintroduced Barack Obama to America. Obama, the campaigner who won so many hearts, minds and votes by speaking about hope, fairness and the fact that he was best suited to meet the challenges that lay ahead.
The state of our union is getting stronger, and we've come too far to turn back now. As long as I'm president, I will work with anyone in this chamber to build on this momentum. But I intend to fight obstruction with action, and I will oppose any effort to return to the very same policies that brought on this economic crisis in the first place.
Obama used his State of the Union address to demand a tax increase for millionaires and launch an aggressive campaign arc built around economic fairness.
In fact, if you're earning $1 million a year, you shouldn't get special tax subsidies or deductions. On the other hand, if you make under $250,000 a year, like 98% of American families, your taxes shouldn't go up. You're the ones struggling with rising costs and stagnant wages. You're the ones who need relief.
Obama's tax reform proposal, made on one of the biggest campaign stages of the year, is the latest in a series of moves the president has made to appeal to the middle class and to present a populist message.
We can either settle for a country where a shrinking number of people do really well, while a growing number of Americans barely get by. Or we can restore an economy where everyone gets a fair shot, and everyone does their fair share, and everyone plays by the same set of rules.
After months of criticism from his Republican rivals on his handling of world affairs, Obama strongly defended his foreign policy record.
For the first time in 9 years, there are no Americans fighting in Iraq. For the first time in 2 decades, Osama bin Laden is not a threat to this country.
The State of the Union also outlined key domestic and international policies that will define Obama administration's focus for the remainder of his term. Expressing hope that a peaceful settlement with Iran is still a possibility, Obama seems to be reinforcing his pacifist credentials. Playing to his core constituency of liberals, The president also promised that the White House will not back down on the clean energy policy. Walking a tightrope, the president managed to address internal issues like education, outsourcing, and the politically sensitive immigrant conundrum in the address as well.
Thank you. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Let me now go across to Professor Singh. Professor Singh, what do you have to say about Barack Obama's fairness agenda? How do you suppose the world would have taken his speech?
I think his speech is momentous. He's a great orator. But there are 4 or 5 things that immediately look as its background. One, of course, this is the opening of his presidential campaign. Most of media has called it not State of Union, but State of Campaign address.
Yes.
Second is the whole shrill pitch that you see of contestants amongst the Republicans, especially Newt Gingrich, for example. So he has to match up to that radical and shrill voice. Third point would be the fact that it is a difficult election for him. With roughly 1.7, 1.8% growth rate, it's not an easy election. So he has to really work hard to formulate his policies. And finally, of course, 8.5% unemployment. So it's a tough election ahead, and he has to deal with that right from now.
Which he is trying to do to his very best of abilities. In fact, Professor Singh, do stay with us. Let's move on. In pledging to lure offshore jobs back to the US and target unfair Chinese trade practices, Barack Obama sought in his State of the Union address to dispel criticisms that he has been too soft in dealing with the world's second largest economy. He also offered tax incentives to American companies bringing jobs back home, a move that will worry outsourcing hotspots like India and China. Let's listen in.
I will go anywhere in the world to open new markets for American products. And I will not stand by when our competitors don't play by the rules. It's not right when another country lets our movies, music, and software be pirated. It's not fair when foreign manufacturers have a leg up on ours only because they're heavily subsidized. Tonight, I'm announcing the creation of a trade enforcement unit that will be charged with investigating unfair trading practices in countries like China. If you're a business that wants to outsource jobs, you shouldn't get a tax deduction for doing it. That money should be used to cover moving expenses for companies like Masterlock that decide to bring jobs home. No American company should be able to avoid paying its fair share of taxes by moving jobs and profits overseas. From now on, every multinational company should have to pay a basic minimum tax.
All right, Professor Singh, you heard Barack Obama over there. Now, he's been criticized for being too soft in dealing with problems back home. Do you think he would have, reached out to an average American through this?
I think the whole address is very clearly aimed at talking to middle class and liberal constituencies. That is where the whole focus is on, reformulating his tax code and ensuring that people who are middle or lower middle income groups get the benefits. His whole great orator in some ways. So his whole focus on describing education as a great equalizer in economic and social sectors, and saying that people should have opportunities for education, how community colleges should link up with industry and ensure that repeatedly people have opportunity to train themselves. His whole focus is clearly on the constituencies which are larger, which are relatively poorer and middle class people. So I think he's definitely tried to reach to them. And the whole issue of outsourcing is also clearly aimed at bringing this whole bit of shade of nationalism into it. Though that of course, is a political rhetoric, and business people don't always listen to political rhetorics, but it's a good speech.
Okay, I'll come back to you in just a bit. Meanwhile, in his 2012 State of the Union address, Obama issued a ringing call for the US administration to take the lead in building an economy that works for all Americans and to revive the promise of a more cooperative politics that carried him to the White House back in 2008. While many of his specific measures are likely to resonate with the public, it remains to be seen whether he can persuade the majority of Americans if they give him a mandate to pursue an aggressive policy agenda.
It's shameful for a president to use the State of the Union to divide our nation.
As governor of Massachusetts, he was pro-abortion, pro-gay rights, pro-tax increase, and pro-gun control.
Having watched his Republican adversaries pound him for weeks, US President Barack Obama used his State of the Union speech on Tuesday to land the first major counterpunch of the still-forming 2012 election. It came before a primetime audience of millions that the GOP candidates can only envy, even if their fiery debates are turning heads.
Let's never forget, millions of Americans who work hard and play by the rules every day deserve a government and a financial system that do the same. It's time to apply the same rules from top to bottom. No bailouts, no handouts, and no cop-outs. An America built to last insists on responsibility from everybody.
Earlier, Republican presidential hopeful Mitt Romney released a rebuttal to Obama's speech. On the day he revealed that he paid federal income taxes at an effective rate of just 13.9% in 2010.
But more than anything, I expect the president will take this opportunity to take another victory lap. You know, in his big speeches, he tends to tell tall tales about an America that's thriving on his watch. In 2010, he announced that the worst of this economic storm has passed. I know the people of Tampa don't believe that.
Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels blamed Obama for worsening America's economic problems. While he acknowledged Obama did inherit the US economic crisis, he said the president had not delivered on his promise to fix it.
The president's grand experiment in trickle-down government has held back rather than sped economic recovery. He seems to sincerely believe we can build a middle class out of government jobs paid for with borrowed dollars. In fact, it works the other way. A government as big and bossy as this one is maintained on the backs of the middle class and those who hope to join it.
Well, as the race hots up for the top job, one thing is for sure. Most of Obama's proposals are set to face stiff Republican resistance, limiting the chance of any headway in a divided Congress before the November 6th presidential election.
Once again, let me go back to Professor Singh. Professor Singh, in the days to come during Obama's campaigning, what are the hurdles that he is likely to face?
Multiple hurdles, actually. The most important to me is the expectation revolution which Obama created when he came to the White House, assuming that everything will change in 4 years. Apparently, the success has been relatively milder. So that's first problem.
His approval ratings
have been dwindling over a period of time. More specifically, issues like stalemate against Taliban, co-option of Taliban, and how domestic constituencies read that. Also, question of Iran. His speech was clearly fairly shrill on Iran, and he's changed his tone from mutual accommodation and respect and dialogue to now saying that none of the options will be off the table. Also, his silence about the role in Libya. Several issues, and I think this whole very, very sharp tone on China, where interdependence is growing, and whatever happens to China immediately impacts on US domestic job scenarios. So there are multiple challenges that Obama's election campaign till November will have to deal with. But finally, I think a good word for India. India was not really mentioned at all in the speech, which is both good and bad. But yes, as far as outsourcing is concerned, it seems India has been building a stronger relationship. Several of our firms have been trying to increase the intake of local staff in the United States.
That's definitely a positive, Professor Singh, for India, but I'm afraid we're totally running out of time. The question still remains, will he or won't he be able to do what he did back in 2008? It's testing time again for Barack Obama. We'll have to wrap it here. Professor Singh, thanks so much for joining us today on World Panorama and sharing your thoughts. We're heading in for a short break, but on the other side, Egypt celebrates 1 year anniversary of the protest that ousted Hosni Mubarak. But there's more to it than just that. Stick around to know. Welcome back. Now, there have been hectic developments this week around Iran as the European Union banned the import of crude oil from Iran and imposed a number of other economic sanctions. With this, the Union has joined the United States in its bid to put Tehran's nuclear development program under pressure. Meanwhile, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad declared Iran will not be hurt by the oil embargo. Here's a look at the latest.
Iran's isolation by the West continues. The European Union has imposed fresh sanctions on Iran by banning the purchase of oil from the country. But Tehran has shrugged off this latest ban. In fact, there are many voices in Iran that see this as an opportunity to not only open new markets but also hit back at Western nations. Many Iranians feel the country should stop selling oil to Europe immediately instead of July to punish the bloc before it can find suppliers to replace Iranian crude oil in the middle of winters. The embargo was imposed as part of an expanded package of sanctions against Iran over its nuclear program. In a bid to step up pressure on Tehran, EU agreed to an immediate ban on all contracts to import, purchase or transport Iranian crude oil and petroleum products, a decision that has been welcomed by the US.
The pressure of sanctions is designed to try and make sure that Iran takes seriously our request to come to the table and meet.
This process will continue to intensify so that Iran understands fully that the pressure will not let up and the isolation will not stop until they decide to make the right choice.
The West fears that Iran's nuclear program is aimed at developing weapons technology under the guise of an energy generation program, a charge that has been denied by Iran.
It is about that we cannot accept that Iran is developing an atomic bomb. It is not only an issue for the regional security, it is also an issue for the entire world. And that is why we need to act firmly. No one likes to do this. At the same time, the door for dialogue stays open.
The European bloc imports 450,000 barrels of Iranian oil per day, making it a key market besides India and China. While China has drastically cut its imports from Iran, India is still playing the wait-and-watch game. So is this a propaganda and psychological war as Tehran sees it, or will the sanctions backfire on the European Union and the US? The question may be difficult to answer, but the sanctions will surely hit Iran's earnings, as it will now be difficult for Iran to get payments in foreign currency, payments worth more than $100 billion for 2011.
Now, Thailand's Prime Minister was in New Delhi for the Republic Day celebrations. The January 25th agreement between India and Thailand to expedite trade talks should also make China wary, as it marks a continuation of a process that had begun in 2011 with South Korea, Indonesia and Vietnam, all key strategic concerns for China.
Things are looking bright for Thailand's Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra. And for her counterpart, things are finally looking up. Having signed a number of agreements with its maritime neighbor, New Delhi is sending a strong message to the major stakeholders in the region.
Developing close relations with Thailand is an important component of our Look East policy. Strong India-Thailand relations contribute to peace, prosperity, and stability in our region.
The two leaders signed MOUs on defense cooperation, cooperation in the field of science and technology, and cultural exchange.
We have agreed to encourage our energy and infrastructure companies to work together, including in third countries. The Prime Minister and I have decided to step up bilateral cooperation and exchanges in the field of defense, counter-terrorism, and security-related issues.
Economic cooperation, including the second protocol signed during the visit to amend framework agreement for establishing free trade area, aims to enhance trade in immediate terms between both nations. On her part, the gracious Prime Minister of Thailand, Shinawatra, lauded India's growing influence in the region.
Prime Minister of India's government assistant during the flood in Thailand last year. Thailand sees India as playing a major role in the East Asia Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forums, and the other regional forums.
With a strong focus on its Look East policy, New Delhi is trying to consolidate its strategic partnership in the region. And with stress on economic cooperation, it is the growing influence of China that India is trying to strike a balance with.
Egyptians took to the streets on Wednesday to mark one-year anniversary of the uprising that ended Hosni Mubarak's 30-year dictatorship. The demonstrations underscored how much has changed in Egypt over the last 1 year. Last January, those protests were met by armies of truncheon-wielding riot police who fired live ammunition at protesters, but now police were nowhere to be seen. Protesters were not only jubilant, but even angry. Here's a report.
I expect a very better future to Egypt if we work together, if Egyptians work together in the same aims, in the same image. We will change everything, inshallah.
Tahrir Square has come full circle. 1 year down the line, some celebrate the success of Islamist parties in the first post-Mubarak elections, while for many, changes in the past 1 year are still not enough.
We believe that under the new president, Egyptians will be able to tell right from wrong by supporting revolutionary reformers and not going in the wrong direction. I am here so we can achieve the revolution's demands and not to celebrate the revolution. Came here to tell the military that the revolution continues and please return to the borders.
Tens of thousands of Egyptians gathered in Cairo to press the military to speed up the transfer of power. Protesters demanded the country's Field Marshal Hussein Tantawi, Mubarak's defense minister for nearly 20 years, be replaced.
It's very simple. They have ruled this past year and done nothing. Please hand over power to the head of the parliament for 60 days and then hold elections. We do not want you anymore.
At least 900 people died in the revolution and 6,000 were injured when soldiers and military police opened fire on protesters last year. Since then, more than 12,000 people have been arrested and tried in the military courts, with several sentenced to death. Activists hope the country's first democratically elected parliament will demand justice for those killed in the past year and force the military rulers from power.
Time for a short break, but last of American President John F. Kennedy's audio recordings have been released, but what's there in these 1960 clips? We'll find out after a break. Thanks for staying with us. Time to take a look at what else made news this week across the world.
A London 2012 commissioner revealed on January 25th she has quit her role in protest at Dow Chemicals' sponsorship. Meredith Alexander feels she can no longer serve on London Mayor Boris Johnson's Commission for Sustainable London 2012 as it would be hypocritical. Alexander is now calling for Dow Chemical to be dropped as Olympic sponsors because the site of the 1994 chemical disaster is still contaminated. The US multinational's involvement in the London Games, billed as being the greenest games ever, has sparked controversy for months. German Chancellor Angela Merkel officially opened the World Economic Forum in Davos with questions about whether an increased Eurozone rescue fund would reassure markets. It was an accident that German Chancellor Angela Merkel was chosen to give the opening address at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Eurozone debt crisis is a key issue among delegates, and Germany is the Eurozone's paymaster. At least a dozen people were killed Thursday in bomb attacks in a city near Baghdad and the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Police in Baghdad said 10 people were killed, including 2 women and 3 children, when insurgents placed bombs around a house in the city of Musayyib, about 70 kilometers south of the capital. In another interesting development this week, the final 45 hours of White House recordings secretly taped during John F. Kennedy's time in office were released this week.
We both went to the same country. One fought the military, one civilian. I mean, how is it that we get this different? This is not a...
Offering researchers a unique perspective into the last 3 months of the assassinated president's administration. The conversations were intentionally recorded by the president, often captured in the Oval Office or cabinet room. but were kept secret from even Kennedy's top aides.
Time to gear up for some sports action in our next segment.
Spanish world number 2 Rafael Nadal came from behind to topple great rival Roger Federer in the Australian Open semi-finals in an enthralling match of the highest quality. Like so many of their battles over the years, their 27th clash was a feast of shot-making with exhilaration and suspense served up in equal measure under the lights of a heaving Rod Laver arena. The 4th-seeded Sharapova overcame a second set rally by Petra Kvitova to advance to her 3rd Australian Open final with a victory on Rod Laver Arena. Craig Bellamy scored the decisive goal against his former club as Liverpool reached the League Cup final by beating Manchester City 3-2 on aggregate. City keeper Joe Hart had kept his side in the game with a succession of excellent saves before Edin Dzeko put the Premier League leaders 2-1 ahead on the night with a 67th minute tap-in. 7 times winners Liverpool were not done yet though, and Bellamy secured their place in the final with a confident finish 16 minutes from time that Hart could do nothing about. Senior Australian batsman Ricky Ponting has been awarded country's highest civil honour along with a host of sportspersons of international repute. The 37-year-old former skipper, who struck a fluent double century against India on the second day of the 4th Test in Adelaide, has been appointed an officer in the General Division of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to the sport of cricket as a leading player and to community through the establishment of the Ponting Foundation.
And with that, we have come to the end of the show. This is me, Sana Khan, signing off. I promise to see you next week, same time, in a brand new episode of World Panorama. We leave you with some visuals as the Chinese ushered in the Chinese New Year, the Year of the Dragon. This year is one of the most revered years of the Chinese New Year calendar. Enjoy and bye for now.